Hey guys, my name is Francisco Hernandez, and today I'm doing another episode in my Building the Shot series where I break down everything that I can about how a single photo of mine was taken. In today's video, I'm going to go over this image on the screen here of Sam from a photo shoot that I did last December. Even though I already made a video from this photo shoot, I still wanted to go over about how this specific shot was taken because it did have a lot of thought process involved with it, so hopefully you guys learn from it. When it comes to the camera and lens that I used the Sony a7R III with the Sigma Art 105 1.4. That's my favorite lens for just blurring the heck out of the background, which is exactly what I did with the photo of Sam that I took. The camera was the Sony a7R III, and that's been my favorite camera since it came out, so that's why I used that combo. When it came to the lighting though, I used the Godox 8600 Pro and the Godox 8400 Pro, also known as the Explorer 400 Pro and the Explorer 600 Pro by Adorama. Those lights were very crucial to this photo shoot because I wanted to use the modeling lamps on those two lights, specifically because it was a night shoot, and at night shoots, I typically use the modeling lamps on my lighting. Because I was raising the low light ambient level to be normal conditions, this also affected everything else like the flash. So even though I would be using a low output on the flash, if I did use the flash, it still ended up being way too strong, which is why I used the modeling lamps instead. This ended up being perfect for the video because you can see exactly how the light looks like as I'm adjusting it, and it also made more color of the eye show up because if you didn't know, since your eyes are dilating in dark lighting, it's going to make more of that black show up, the pupil. So when you use a continuous lamp and it shows or shines into the subject's eyes, it makes more color show up. Before I continue, I do want you guys to know about an awesome deal that's happening right now at Adorama. It's going to be a deal of 2 Godox 8200s and a free Godox V1 for $5.99. All you have to do to get the free Godox V1 is just add the pair of the Godox 8200s to your cart, and then you get the option of adding a free Godox V1. For any Sony users out there, I would highly recommend you get the Canon version of the Godox V1, specifically because it has a much stronger hot shoe. If you didn't already know this, you can actually use other brand versions of Godox lighting off camera just fine with high-speed sync and TTL. So if you have a Godox V1 that's for Canon and you want to use it off camera, even if you have a Sony camera, as long as you have a Sony transmitter on that Sony camera, you can use that Godox V1 just fine, even though it's for Canon. Another thing that I've noticed is that whenever you use MagMod modifiers or any other modifiers out there that uses the light's hot shoe, it's going to be better to use the Canon hot shoe rather than the Sony one, because sometimes the Sony one can be a struggle to actually adapt it to there, or sometimes it won't even connect at all. So if you're like myself and don't care for high-speed sync or TTL while the light is on camera, then I would suggest the Canon mount version. This is seriously such an awesome deal that I highly recommend. So if you guys want to take advantage of this deal, I will leave a link in the description area below. If you guys know anybody out there at all that's interested in lighting or getting some lighting and want an awesome deal to start with, this is going to be that deal. Alright, so now that you guys know about that deal, let's continue with this video. I'm going to just jump right into Lightroom to show you guys all of the photos straight out of camera and the thought process that was involved. Okay, so unfortunately for Sam, this is the very first photo that I took completely straight out of camera. You can definitely tell from the ambient that it is pretty dark, but I do increase the ambient in my next shot because basically what I learned from this shot here was the ambient was too dark and I want to do some other things like go a little bit closer, and I was getting a feel for my settings. I also tend to take these shots for you guys here to show you guys visually what goes through my head for these videos. I'm going to go ahead and raise the exposure of the shot 2 stops so you guys can see everything much nicer. You can see in the top right corner of the screen a little bit of the softbox for the 400 Pro. I was using the Godox mount 33.4 inch softbox for the Godox 8300 Pro and the Godox 8400 Pro. Those two lights use Godox mounts. And there's 2 or actually 3 modifiers that use Godox mounts, which make it much more portable than the Bowens mount versions of those modifiers, which is why I use them a lot at my photo shoots. You can also see the strip softbox. I believe it was the Cheetah Stand 12 to 55 inch softbox that they make, and I use that with the Godox 8600 Pro for some nice rim light. Whenever I take these strip softbox out, I do tend to want a head to toe coverage of the subject, but for this shot I didn't want that because if I did light her on the feet area, then it would kind of make a strong light to kind of counteract the nice shadow that I was getting here from the main light. So I wanted it to just kind of fall off around the knees, which is exactly why I had it positioned at that height. What I'm seeing on the screen right now is pretty much exactly how I would want the ambient light to look like. So had I known that this is exactly how I want the exposure to look, then I would know that I need to be 2 stops brighter. So I could either raise the ISO 2 stops or slow the shutter or widen the aperture if it's not already at the max aperture. I did have the ISO at 100 so I could raise the ISO, but the shutter is a tricky one because I was taking a picture of her as she was walking, and even as she wasn't walking there was a lot of motion blur going on. So from this shot to the next shot, I do increase the shutter speed to reduce that little bit of motion blur from 1/180th to 1/100th, and the ISO goes from ISO 100 one step higher to ISO 200. Here's that next shot straight at the camera, but again, I'm gonna go ahead and just raise the ambient just a little bit so you guys can see everything a little bit better. You can see that she's out of focus. You can see I'm also at a closer composition than the last shot, and you can also see a little bit of the softbox, I believe, yeah, right there in the top corner. But what you can learn from this shot here, this incorrectly taken shot, is that she's a little bit overexposed, so I know that the distance is gonna be crucial. As she's getting closer to the light, because she is going to be walking, you have to really take into consideration where you want to take the shot. Unless somebody was actually moving the light with her as she was walking, then you have to really time the shot. I'm pretty sure the fact that she's out of focus is entirely on me, but it wasn't really crucial to this specific photo because I was getting the timing right more than anything, and I was also checking how the composition looked when it was much closer than the previous shot. But again, I do want you guys to focus on mainly the settings and how they adjusted from the last shot. So I'm at ISO 200, f1.4, 1/100th of a second. And in this next shot here, I am at the same settings. And the reason why I wanted to take this shot with the same settings is because that last shot, again, I was just taking the shot out of focus just for the composition, just to see how well she fit into that comp. And in this shot here, I took the shot, and I'm gonna zoom in. I was mainly taking this shot here to see if she was still gonna be blurry, even though she was standing still. Because if motion blur was going to be an issue for this shot where she was just standing still, then it's definitely going to be an issue for when she was walking. But I did want a better representation of that issue. So for the next shot, even though she is walking, I did want to take another shot to kind of show the motion blur. I'm at the exact same settings as the last shot, and she is closer to the light, so that's why she's a little bit brighter. But when I zoom in, you can see that there is that motion blur that's going on. So I know from this shot to the next one, what I would need to do is increase the shutter speed to reduce that motion blur, but by increasing actually the shutter speed, it would also reduce the ambient. So I would then need to raise the ISO. With photography, it's always going to be a balancing game on your specific conditions. So for this shot, since she was going to be walking, that meant I need to increase the shutter. If she was standing still, then maybe I can get by with less fast shutter or slower shutter. For this shot here, I did get the ambient light exactly where I wanted it to be finally. It took a couple of shots, but I went from ISO 200 from that last shot to ISO 800, which is again is 2 stops, 200 to 400, 400 to 800. But I also increased the shutter from 1/100th to 1/250th, so it is a bit faster. And it ended up with this shot here. The lighting actually looks good, and she also is now finally sharp. She's not, there's no motion blur going on, and I got the shot exactly how I want it to be. And all I needed to do now was make sure that I took another shot without the softbox in the way so that I can kind of erase it in Photoshop. I was really happy with this shot, but since it was a walking shot, I thought maybe I would get a better expression or pose as she continued to do a couple more tries. So that's exactly what I did. I took a couple more shots, seeing how the light looked differently as she was closer, maybe she was smiling a little bit better, or the way that the hair was blowing. And you can see those shots here. In this shot, you can see that she's actually darker because she is further away from the light. So I do have to time it when she's closer to take the shot. But one thing that really stuck out to me at this point, I wouldn't say a lot, but some people out there on Instagram were saying that I photoshopped that purple light behind her. When in reality, it was more about just purely timing it. Not for myself, I didn't know when that light was gonna go on, but at the time that I took that shot, that light was on there. And it was dependent on where I was positioned and where Sam was positioned. If I positioned the light so that it was behind her, it wouldn't really show, but it was behind her head, so it did show up in the hair light. Getting that light to be purple, again, was just pure timing. You can see in this shot and this next shot that it's now blue. So it was just purely timing on that bar, having those lights flash different colors to get that purple. In this next shot, you can see that she's closer to the light so that she's properly exposed, but now she has a weird pose where she's, 2 feet are kind of next to each other. And in this next shot here, that's the final one that I ended up really liking and wanted to edit this shot for you guys on Facebook and Instagram. This image is edited though, so I'm gonna go ahead and just reset the settings so you guys can see exactly how it looks like straight at a camera. And then this is with the settings applied. I will show you guys the settings in a second, but I want you guys to focus on the fact that the softbox is in the way. And usually when that happens, I usually take another shot in the exact same position with the light out of the way so that I can just erase it in Photoshop. And I forgot to do that for this shot here, but I believe I used this shot here where it wasn't in the way to kind of just copy that section of the wall and add it to the other photo. I'm gonna go ahead and go through the settings really quickly. I added a little bit more exposure, raised the shadows, lowered the whites because it was a little bit hot in the highlights, changed some colors here like the yellows, the hue. I don't think I affected the saturation or luminance. I made it a tad bit sharper at 60. I also fixed a tad bit of distortion that happened by enabling the profile corrections. And here's the settings on the bottom that I adjusted. I kind of just had fun and played with the sliders to see what looked good. What I usually do though is just raise the blue primary saturation slider to 80. This usually makes the blues and the oranges too bright or too saturated, so I usually reduce them. But the reason why I didn't do that for this shot here was because she is a little bit pale, so it brought her level of skin, the saturation, to normal levels, and there wasn't a lot of blue in the shot, which looked nice saturated, so I just left them like that. And here's the behind the scenes photo of the shot. And now let's move into Photoshop. Okay, so I'm just gonna go ahead and just move through the layers because this isn't an editing tutorial, but it's more just like showing you guys how I edited the shot. So let's go ahead and show you guys the first layer, which was removing the octa from that other shot. And then I went ahead and just did a little bit of liquefy. Yeah, actually this whole layer I think is dedicated to just liquefying the boots and her waist and a little bit of the shirt and her hair. This very next shot is to remove distractions. Should have labeled that one. And then I did a little bit of frequency separation, and I will go ahead and zoom in on the legs because I did frequency separation on this shot specifically because of the legs. I felt like they were a little bit rough. And then I added a little bit of nice color grading with the selective color adjustment layer tool. Did a little bit dodge and burn. Let's see, I'll leave it like right here. I felt like the highlights were a little bit too bright, so I corrected that. I made them a little bit darker, and then a little bit of dodge and burn to her arms, legs, and her face. I'm such a stickler for some little things that I felt like this leg was more saturated than the other, so I desaturated that. And I think I also forgot to show you guys that I did change the skirt color because the black of the skirt and the black of the shirt were different. So I sampled a little bit of the color of the shirt, painted it over the skirt, and then I just went ahead and just changed the blending mode of the layer to color. And then I changed the color of this poster as well, and also a little bit more of the shirt color. And then I made it a little bit darker with the levels adjustment layer, and made it a little bit brighter with the curves adjustment, and that's what created the final image. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it helped you, and also don't forget to take advantage of those deals and share them with your friends. And take care, and I'll see you guys in the very next video.